Welcome to the collection of the wildest and craziest 𝐂𝐸 Reddit stories of all time. From wild betrayals to shocking twists, these tales will leave you questioning who is really in the wrong. Let's dive in together. The first story for this collection is from unusual_astronaut 766. Would I be an AH if I canceled Thanksgiving to keep my daughter-in-law away from her parents? Hello, I'm very emotional writing this and could use some advice. I am a mom of 3 adult sons, 30M, 27M, and 25M. My oldest son's name is Spencer, and he's been with his wife Sam since high school. They have a beautiful daughter together who is almost a year old. To be honest, Sam has become like a daughter to me over the years. She and Spencer live around 8 hours away by car, so I don't see them too often. But Sam and I typically talk on the phone once a week. She's never said anything bad about her parents to me in the past, but I can tell she seems tense around them. I also know she didn't like visiting home until she started spending holidays with us. I actually visited them for the weekend and had fun seeing my son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. The night before I left, Sam and I stayed up late talking. I made a comment about how being a parent can be hard, and it's scary knowing you can't protect your kids from everything. I said that I always tried to educate my boys, give them the tools to stick up for themselves, and listen when something was bothering them. I said I know she'll do the same things for her daughter and do everything to protect her. Sam's face went white, and I asked what was wrong. She asked me if Spencer had told me anything. I asked what she was talking about, and she got teary. She opened up to me about the fact that her maternal grandfather abused her as a child, ages 9 to 11, and when she told her parents in her late teens, they didn't believe her and thought she might be remembering things wrong. It's since come out that the grandpa several of her cousins, and at least one of her little sisters. She's the oldest of 4 girls. Her parents now believe she was, but they've never apologized to her. Also, the few times they've talked about what happened, Sam's mum basically says she's relieved it wasn't that bad since the grandfather never penetrated her with his. Sam didn't want to discuss the specific details with me, but she said he did disgusting and humiliating things to her body. When Sam was telling me all this, she got more and more upset, and by the end of the conversation, she was crying so hard she could hardly breathe. I tried to comfort her and tell her how strong she is, but she was completely devastated talking about it. I've also known her since she was a teenager, and it's so hard to know the girl I knew was going through so much and navigating it on her own. I spoke to Spencer about the situation in the morning before I started driving home, and he said he's surprised she opened up to me about it because she hates talking about that period of her life. I told Spencer that my heart is broken for her, and I don't know how either of them tolerated her parents. Spencer says he dislikes them for how they treated Sam, but she still wants some relationship with them. He says that she gets anxious every time they go home for the holidays, and that there's usually a blowout fight at least one of the nights when they're there. I was originally going to host Thanksgiving and invite Sam's family. I always do this to be polite, and Sam appreciates that her sisters and parents are included. To be honest, I don't think I can stomach being in the same room as her parents. So soon after learning what they did to Sam, I asked Spencer what Sam would think if I canceled Thanksgiving this year, and our family visited them in the city instead. Her family would obviously be invited, but they haven't visited them once in the 5 or so years they've lived there, so the odds of them accepting are low. Spencer likes my idea, and thinks Sam would be relieved since it would give her an excuse not to see them this year. Basically, Spencer thinks she won't feel guilty if I'm the one making the decision and changing the plans. So would I be an AH for canceling Thanksgiving? If anyone has advice on how I can support Sam and navigate things with her parents, I'd really appreciate it. OP is not an AH for standing up for her daughter-in-law and keeping her away from her parents, who always belittled his concerns about being molested by her grandpa. Keeping distance from such parents is the best option. OP is not an AH, rather her daughter's parents and grandpa are AHs. I would rate her parents 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP's grandpa deserves 5 out of 5 on the AH scale. As for OP, I would rate her 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from Dependent-Clothes 350. 𝐂𝐸 for kicking my sister out of my wedding because she made a joke about my husband's appearance? Throw away because I don't want my family finding this. This is a long one, so please bear with me. I'm honestly wondering if I went way overboard, but I still feel conflicted. I, 29F, recently got married to my wonderful husband, Dan, 30M, after dating for 8 years. We had a beautiful wedding, But there's been a huge fallout since that day that I need to sort out. Dan is kind, intelligent, and supportive, but he has a visible birthmark on his face that he's always been sensitive about. I've always loved him for who he is and think he's perfect just the way he is, but I know how hard it can be for him. He tends to blush easily, especially in situations where he feels uncomfortable or is the center of attention. I've tried my best to help him feel confident and assured, reminding him how attractive he is to me. My sister, Emily, 31F, has always been the jokester of the family. Growing up, she was the center of attention, always quick with a quip or a pun. While that made her fun to be around, it also meant that her jokes often crossed lines. At family gatherings, she'd poke fun at me, my parents, and even my friends. Although I could usually laugh it off, I've noticed that her humor tends to be at someone else's expense, which often makes me uncomfortable. When I introduced Emily to Dan for the first time, she made a comment about how nice it was that I found someone who could match my tomato red face. I brushed it off, but Dan looked a bit uncomfortable. I later spoke to Emily privately, explaining that jokes about his appearance make him feel self-conscious. She apologized, but insisted she was just trying to be funny. I let it slide, hoping she'd understand. But over time, she kept making these little digs, always framing them as jokes. I'd tried to change the subject, but it just felt like it became a running gag in our family. As the wedding approached, I had a lot on my mind. Planning everything was stressful, and I wanted it to be perfect for Dan and me. But I also knew I had to keep Emily in check. Before the wedding, I had a serious talk with her. I told her that while I appreciated her humor, I needed her to tone it down during the wedding, especially around Dan. She laughed it off and promised to behave, but I had my doubts. On the day of the wedding, everything was magical. Dan looked incredible, and I felt beautiful. The ceremony went smoothly, and when it was time for the reception, I was excited to celebrate with our family and friends. However, when it was time for speeches, Emily took the mic and started with a cute story about me as a child. Everyone was laughing, and I was feeling great. But then, she transitioned to Dan. She said, "Now, let's all raise a glass to my new brother-in-law." I always knew my name would marry a guy who could match her red-faced embarrassment. Her laughter echoed in the room, and for a moment, I felt the air get sucked out. I saw Dan's face drop, and he looked completely mortified. The room went silent. It was as if everyone was holding their breath. I don't know what came over me, but I felt a rush of anger and embarrassment. I jumped up from my seat, grabbed the mic, and said, "Emily, please leave. You're ruining this moment for everyone." The shock on her face was palpable. She stood there, frozen, then tried to laugh it off, saying, "It was just a joke. Come on." But I was firm. I didn't care if it was her idea of humor. I needed to protect Dan. She left the venue in tears, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Some guests looked horrified, while others seemed supportive. I returned to Dan, who looked conflicted. He whispered, "I appreciate you standing up for me, but I think you overreacted. She didn't mean any harm." I felt a pang of guilt, but justified it by thinking about all the times she'd made similar jokes in the past. The rest of the night was a blur. I tried to enjoy our first dance and the cake cutting, but the tension loomed over us. My parents pulled me aside, clearly upset. They scolded me for making a scene on my wedding day, saying I embarrassed the family and ruined what should have been a joyful occasion. My dad said, "You should have just let it go. It was a joke." As the days passed, I felt the aftermath weighing on me. Emily hasn't spoken to me since the wedding. She posted on social media about how heartbroken she was, that her own sister couldn't take a joke, and how she was blocked from the happiest day of my life. My parents think I owe her an apology to keep the peace. And my mum keeps reminding me how important family is. It's become this pressure cooker, and I'm stuck in the middle. Dan, bless his heart, is trying to be supportive, but he wants to move on. He suggested I reach out to Emily and apologize if it means keeping the peace. I don't want to seem weak or like I'm backing down, but I also don't want to lose my sister. I feel like I'm being torn in two directions, defending my husband and keeping my family together. I keep replaying the wedding in my head, wondering if I went too far by kicking her out in front of everyone. Should I have let it slide one more time? Was I too quick to react in the moment? Aita for how I handled this. OP is not an AH for standing up for her husband. OP's sister's comments about OP's husband's birthmark are unjustifiable, especially when he is very sensitive about the mark. OP's sister is an AH for mocking OP's husband, and I would rate her 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Her parents are also AHs for supporting and enabling Emily's behavior, so I would rate them 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. As for OP, I would give her 0 out of 5. Let's now jump onto the next story from kindly-cry-4974 Ita for not paying for a trip I couldn't attend on the first day that my brother found a replacement for and told me not to worry about, then asked me to pay for after the trip concluded. My brother, 28M, set up a houseboat trip on a holiday weekend with a group of close friends that had taken many trips in years before. In past trips, I, 30F, had invited him to, had made sure the important information was shared directly, and confirmed there was transport for everyone. In earlier years, everyone had paid the same, and as time went on, there was a preference to pay by room, which was great for couples, but sucked for singles that I pushed back on. On this trip, the first on a boat, I was initially asked to pay the same monetary amount for one of 2 curtain narrow beds below decks, as my brother and his wife together were going to pay for one of 2 full cabins with a door and windows upstairs. I pushed back and my brother agreed to, in his words, pay part of my expense as a favor to me, since his friend had agreed to the price of the other narrow bed below. I didn't agree with his math, but the outcome was the same, so I let it go. Around the time I planned on sending him the agreed upon number, he said I should also plan on paying into the TBD group shared grocery expenses, which would be determined on the first trip day. I have a food allergy and had already explained I planned to do separate groceries to avoid an allergic exposure as severity had been getting worse. He said he was pretty sure it would be fine, and I should still pay into the share, and I planned to iron it out when we got there by showing the folly of this at the grocery store, since the allergen is listed in almost every prepared food. There were about 30 emails, plus separate texts with my brother, amongst the group, and I zoned out at a certain point assuming I would be driving out with my brother and his wife, the same as with every other trip I'd attended with him. I called the Thursday before the long weekend to make sure I hadn't missed anything, and learned they planned to meet at the boat midday Friday, not Saturday, information buried in the group emails, and had expected me to drive myself, because with their new dog, the back seat was taken. I had a work meeting Friday morning that was too late to change, or I would have packed up and tried to get a train home that night. I was in NYC working 14-hour days at the time, and had obviously made a number of incorrect assumptions, which, while not an excuse, explains how I got so lost. I had thought I was doing better emotionally after a difficult year, but wasn't in a great space, and felt like a failure of a person for mishandling the situation so badly. I was in tears, realizing how badly I had messed up, and also feeling triggered that this weekend of fun was turning into a messy 1-year anniversary of the same holiday 1 year before, where shortly after a traumatic experience supporting my grandmother while she died in hospice, my fiancé expressed that he was unsure if he still loved me / wanted to see other people / we broke up, and I returned to my apartment with my engagement ring on and anything of value owned by my fiancé missing. I'd been an emotional mess after, and was just starting to feel like maybe I had it together again. Travel from NYC to our home area was a 7-hour trip, and driving myself another 4 or 5 hours to get to the houseboat location was going to be beyond my physical capacity. I asked about meeting them on Saturday, wherever they were at that time, and he mentioned his MIL had wanted to attend, so he would see if she would take my place. I said I really did want to go on this trip, and I'd talk with our parents to see if there might be another solution. My dad offered to drive me on Saturday, so-called brother back, but he said MIL can go instead, so don't worry about it. I was disappointed, but also heard meeting me on Saturday was going to be difficult, so I let it go. After the trip concluded, I spoke with my brother to ask how it went. He said it went well, and then asked for my payment for the trip. I expressed confusion. He said he didn't feel comfortable charging his MIL after she had just paid for a celebratory restaurant outing after his master's degree graduation. For context, he works in finance and his employer paid for the grad school degree. He was already out earning me, married to a working spouse, and a homeowner. I said, I'm confused about why you would discourage me from attending the trip a day late. Tell me you found someone to take my place and to not worry about it, then ask me to pay for another person attending in my place because they paid for something else for you recently. I said, if after really thinking that through from my perspective, you still think it is fair to charge me for the trip, let me know and I will pay you. But for the record, that does not sound fair to me. Brother never asked me again about the money, but has slowly become increasingly distant. And recently my other brother, then 32M, now 43M, encouraged me, now 41F and disabled, to pay him back, saying I should have paid for the trip before it started anyway, that it would have been incredibly expensive for them to move the houseboats a day after docking at their destination to reach a place where I could board, and that it was a silly thing to make a big deal about, and that it still annoyed our brother, now 38M, who had discussed it with him on their other trips. They have been going on annual houseboat trips and others since without inviting me. I'm conflicted. On one hand, I feel like I was getting nickel and dimed even before the trip started, which, considering my generosity with this brother, then 28M, now 38M, when we were younger, rubs me the wrong way. I know if I had paid in advance, I would have asked if the MIL was okay paying me back for taking my place, or would have discussed how much of the expense she planned to cover, but more likely would have insisted on attending the second day, which would have been a pain for the group to accommodate. I feel like I am being painted as the AH when I made a human mistake that I apologized for, but also would have done a ton to accommodate if the roles had been reversed. OP is not an AH for not paying for the trip, because her brother had told her not to worry about skipping it, since his mother-in-law was supposed to fill the spot. Now, OP is not responsible for paying for the trip she didn't go on. Demanding money from OP seems to be unfair. For this reason, OP's brother is an AH, and I would rate him 1.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. And OP gets nothing. Let's now jump onto the next story from Grocery Puzzle headed 5. Would I be an AH for not telling an ex-friend her husband is cheating on her? So, my ex-friend, who I'll call A, met her husband through me. He was actually in a relationship with another good friend of mine, who I'll call B, but they were from separate friend groups, so didn't know each other outside of this house party I threw. Now, this husband, who I'll call C, was tolerated by me and other friends due to B, but as time went on, we saw a lot of red flags in his behavior towards B. They eventually separated, to our relief. However, next thing I know, A and C got together. Turns out they had exchanged numbers at my party, and had stayed in contact since, yes, while he was still with B. After B and C separated, more of the truth came out, and turns out our suspicions were right. He had been emotionally and occasionally physically abusive, so I was pretty horrified that he was now dating another friend of mine who had no idea of his relationship with B. I confided in a mutual friend, who I'll call D, and who was closer to A than me, about my concerns, and let's just say it didn't go down well. D told A about my concerns, and was basically told to mind my own business. However, D and A's own sister reached out to me several times over the next couple months to discuss their own concerns about C that they'd witnessed with their own eyes. A continued her relationship with him, though. He changed his faith to align with hers, which was a huge deal. While not a virgin, in her early 20s, she vowed celibacy until marriage, and C agreed to the same. Throughout this, I remained friends with B, and, rightly or wrongly, relayed a few things back to her. She had been struggling to come to terms with her separation from C. Not because she loved him anymore, but due to trying to make sense of the abuse she had endured. Despite now being in a relationship with A, C still tried to contact her on a semi-regular basis. When B's grandmother died, C went to great lengths to try and get in contact, despite being told to leave her alone. Now, word got around that I was still friends with B, and that B knew things about A and C's relationship that she wouldn't otherwise know. I understand that I could be seen as a gossip, and I totally get that, but it genuinely wasn't my intention. I was seeing C's poor and somewhat stalkerish behavior towards B, and felt that A should know, but after her reaction towards me in the beginning, the most I could do was keep D aware of what was going on and let her choose what to do with the information. Essentially, it all blew up. I got mad at me and D for talking about her relationship, and I was voted off the island. I also grew apart from B for unrelated reasons, so my friendship group, overnight, got very small indeed. Despite acknowledging that I was trying to be helpful, even D took a side. I gained a reputation as an untrustworthy gossip and didn't speak to anyone for 2 years. I watched from afar as A and C got married and had a child. All looked well from the outside, but by this point, I didn't care that much anymore. I had my own life stuff going on that needed my attention, so I didn't waste too much energy on them. Last week, I met up with B for the first time in 2 years. We discussed our own fallout and put a lot of stuff to rest. It was extremely cathartic as I had missed her a lot. She also filled me in on A and C drama. C was still being a weirdo stalker, turning up to one of her shows. She loves performing, with another woman who wasn't his wife, but turns out was cheating on his wife with another mutual friend. He does seem to like to keep his circle small. I have no reason to believe she'd lie about it, and it makes sense. the mutual friend C slept with was B's best friend, but was the reason the gossiping got back to A and C. And I was always confused as to why this friend would go behind B's back to tell them what was being said. Turns out she was in love with C, and despite C getting married and having a child with another woman, believed he loved her too. I want to stay out of it, and I will. But I also feel bad about knowing and not saying a damn thing. So, WIBTA for staying out of this one. TLDR. Friend's husband is cheating on her, but already exploded when I tried to warn her about her husband's reputation when they first got together. Caused me to lose a lot of friends, but new information is making me feel bad about keeping it to myself. OP is not an AH here, because she has already tried to warn A about C's behavior, and suffered a significant fallout as a result. Given A's previous reaction, it is best for OP to stay away from her ex-friend. Let's now jump on to the next story from Crap Kid Throwaway. My husband is better than my best friend's husband. Aita? I'm writing this post because my best friend's Kate husband, Bert, called my husband, Tim, an ass. I have historically kept my opinion of Bert's behavior to a minimum on the grounds that good friends say their piece once and then love each other through relationships. But I'm asking internet strangers to be the judge. I am traveling for work. Kate is stuck at home, working, at 7 months pregnant on modified bed rest. Generally during the week, I drop over once or twice to bring her family some dinner. Tim cooks extra portions once a week to share, cheer her up, read her oldest a couple of bedtime stories so that mom can go to bed early and get some sleep. Bert works an office job. Stressful, I'm sure, but during her pregnancy, he's been working longer and longer hours. Salaried, not overtime. She's been sad and a bit lonely. Yes, I've suggested counseling. With that for background, this evening she and I were texting. It was about 6-ish, and she got a craving for a taco place near my house, and importantly, near Bert's office. She says she asked him to grab her some on his way home. He says he's not stopping. He's got work at home and she should just DoorDash something close. This makes her extremely sad. She's saying irrationally sad, but you be the judge, because he used to surprise her with her favorite tacos, and now he can't be bothered. As one does, I tell Tim. I'm 3 states away, so it was just part of our chat, as I was getting back to the hotel and getting ready for a work dinner. I get back from dinner, and Tim had gone and picked her up tacos, remembered the bag of things I'd collected for her, and the kid that were in my car, and pulled a tuna casserole from the freezer. Bert hates tuna casserole. He dropped them off on the porch, and just texted her that there were some things I wanted her to have. Then Bert gets home. Did he bring tacos, coloring books, or a good attitude? No, he did not. He called Tim to tell him that he was an asshole for showing him up. Other colorful language was also used, including some fairly sexist nonsense. He also texted me telling me to keep my husband away from his wife. Tim did respond rudely when Bert called. Kate says he told Bert he was a failure as a human, a man, a father, and a husband. Apparently, that caused Bert to scream expletives so loud their daughter started to cry. Not good. Tim then hung up on Bert, blocked him, and texted Kate that if she needed someone in an emergency, she knew where to call. But he wasn't putting up with her husband any longer. It's a giant cluster, and I have no idea what's going to happen. My husband feels bad things escalated so much, particularly since their daughter was crying. He feels like an asshole at the moment. Obviously, Bert thinks he's an asshole. I think he's a sweet man. What do you guys think? Update. I apologize for screwing up the title last time. I was trying to be brief and wound up being wildly disappointing. My apologies. Hopefully this is more effective. This update is shared with Kate and Tim's permission. For reasons, Bert can go f*** himself. Bert did email Tim this morning to apologize. Bert said he had forgotten I was out of town, and he didn't realize that Tim was dropping off the meal train food. It was a weird email for many reasons, but Tim responded politely, if non-committal. Tim hasn't changed his view of Bert in part because of what happened between Bert and Kate this afternoon. Bert also texted me to apologize, but I didn't get his message until after I landed, and by then everything else had happened. I've elected not to respond. Bert went home around noon after staying at a hotel last night. Kate's sister had taken their daughter to the park, so Bert and Kate could talk it out. Short version is that Bert has been avoiding Kate because she's not happy during this pregnancy. I mentioned in a comment that Kate had been married previously, and shortly after her first husband died, she had complications in a pregnancy that forced her on bed rest. Unfortunately, her son didn't make it. Her current pregnancy is bringing up a lot of painful memories, and she's scared she won't be able to make it to full term. So, yes, she's not as cheery as she was when she was pregnant with their daughter. It's a difficult time. Bert is frustrated and angry that she's not happy, so he's been staying late and ignoring her until she stops doing that. I know that sounds horrid, but I think they could have worked through those feelings. But as he was explaining how he felt, he said she should be glad her son wasn't there, because otherwise she wouldn't have this life at all. Yeah, that still knocks the wind out of me. It's so cruel. She did talk to him about that statement, but the explanation doesn't get better. In any event, for her that was just the end. She told him she was done, they can work out joint custody, but the marriage was over. She called her sister, and she and her husband encouraged Bert to leave. Currently, Kate's not angry or sad or panicked. She's just done. Personally, I'm surprised since they've weathered some fairly things including infidelity by him, but I guess that was the line. In any event, her D&D friends are over there for Saturday games night, and they are eating waffles. She thought it was important for the internet to know that waffles are appropriate separation food. In terms of her well-being, which many kind souls were worried about, they have a prenup. The house is hers, his family property is his. I'm sure there will be a fight over custody, but she will be financially okay. In any event, she has family and friends who will help and support regardless of what happens. OP and her husband are not AHs for being kind to their pregnant friend, whose husband doesn't care about her. Instead, her friend's husband is an AH for not taking care of his wife. For his negligence, I would rate him 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. And OP's husband deserves 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump onto the next story from Brendan the Jet. Aita for cutting ties with my brother-in-law and for being upset with my wife for her part in it, below. I'm sorry for the length. I'm 33M, a happily married man, and my wife is my best friend. We are supposed to be a team and have each other's backs and best interests at heart. It's a cliche, it's cringe, but it's true. However, something has come up and it has me doubting and looking at her differently. I want to know Aita for being upset with her for all this. Long story short, about a year ago, my wife asked me to sell a spare vehicle that I was doing nothing with to her brother. His fiancée and him shared a vehicle, and it wouldn't do since they were moving to another state. Very reliable, nothing flashy, KBB at $5,000 to $6,000. She knew that I never used it. I definitely didn't need the money and I'm still not in a position where a loss would hurt me or matter to me. I didn't want to do it because if something did happen, I didn't want to be blamed or guilted or whatever. She assured me that wouldn't happen. He was a stand-up guy, etc., etc. Went ahead and did it. Huge discount. $1,500 opposed to KBB. She wasn't pushing me to sell it, but I could tell that she really wanted me to. And her brother and I were on pretty good terms back then. I even went ahead and said they could make payments due to moving expenses being pretty heavy. They offered to come up with something before the moved on June 10th. I said if they did that, then they wouldn't have to make a first payment until August. They came up with $250 and moved to Tennessee. Now from June to August, he ignores me. Normally he used to respond to my calls or texts almost immediately. So when he ignored my 4 or 5 texts, nothing aggressive mind you, just casual, oh hey, how's it going out there? Or, hope everything is going well. Haven't heard from. I became a little hesitant, but not concerned. After all, I truly didn't and don't need the money. Then I find out he's talking to my wife pretty regularly but ignoring me. He finally answers me at the end of August and says he will send me something by the end of the week. Well, the end of the week comes. He continues to ignore me. August turns into November. He's continually talking to my wife. She is talking with him like nothing is wrong, talking to him like everything is fine, never mentioning me or the situation with me once. Finally, I've had enough. I told him if he can't make the payments, I'll take the car back because my dad's friend will give me $6,300 cash on the spot. No hard feelings, but I'll just take the car back. He responds with sunshine and rainbows and apologies and promise after promise. I explain it's not the money, but the principle. I just needed communication and a little appreciation for doing a favor I never wanted to do that none of his friends or family would have done. He swears he will get me something by the end of the week. Promise, excuse, promise, excuse. The end of the week comes, then the month, then the end of the next month. My wife continues to talk to him as happy and as normal as ever. I lose it on him. He explodes and says some things he could never take back. The argument turned into something that would end our relationship forever. Well, all this time he's been coming back to Colorado almost every month. So I ask when is he coming back so he can bring the car. He says it'll be a year or two. At the time I'm working a lot and can't just drop everything and head out there. I go to get it transported. It'll be about $1,900 to do so. I make arrangements with him to do it, and then, on the day of transport, he hides the vehicle. I had to pay half up front and lose out on the money. I explain to my wife I'm done and he's out of my life forever. I also find out that either before I said I'd take the car back or after, he trashed the vehicle. Wrecked the hell out of it. Trashed it inside. It all up. I found out that my wife knew about that. I found out that since then she has kept along with talking to him and never one time getting upset with him or yelling at him or even just mentioning it once to him. I then find out that 2 months or so he drove the car back here. She not only knew about it, but also went and saw him. She knows how hard I've been trying to get it back from him. I won't call the cops. Just can't. I'm not that guy. But she saw him in it, didn't tell me, continues talking to him. And now I'm doubting everything and seeing her differently, and I'm more than hurt and upset. She says I'm overreacting and being dramatic. What do I do? Ida, am I overreacting? WTF. OP is not an AH for feeling disappointed and abandoned. He helped his brother-in-law by selling him his spare car at a significant discount. However, in return, he was ignored, lied to, and disrespected. To make matters worse, OP's wife did not support him. Given these circumstances, OP's reaction is completely justified. On the other hand, OP's brother-in-law is the AH in this situation, and I would rate him 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. OP's wife is also an AH for not standing up for her husband, so I would rate her 1.5 out of 5. OP is not at fault in this scenario.